Alright guys, as promised, I am making a video on the back side of the review. So here we go. So for number 9 it says simplify negative square root of 81 over 121. As I've told you guys in class, I always like to split them up. So I like to do the square root of 81 and the square root of 121. So remember that there's got to be a negative. The square root of 81 ends up being 9. Square root of 121 gives you 11. Okay, so first and foremost, A is going to be one of the answers. A reminder once again that when it says select all that apply, typically means there's going to be more than one answer. So if you plug in negative 9 divided by 11 on your calculator, the second answer that you should also be getting is B, which is a negative 0.81 repeating. For number 10, there are 4 equations. On each one of these equations, you have to solve each one of them using inverse operations. So remember the opposite of adding, subtracting, opposite of multiplying, dividing. The opposite of cubing something is going to be to do the cube root. Whatever you do to one side, you must do to the other side. So when you do the cube root of negative 0.512, you end up getting a negative 0.8, which puts C as the first answer here. Okay. Same thing for the second one, or the one on the right, I should say. You're going to do the cube root. Whatever you do to one side, you must do to the other side. So the cube root of this one is going to end up being y equals, y equals 0.7. which ends up being letter B, so I'll put B here. And again, all we're doing is we're just typing it into the calculator. For the next one, we're not doing cube root, we're doing square root, because the opposite of squaring something is to do the square root. So the square root of a 0.64, your answer should be plus or minus 8, because you can either have 2 positive 0.8s or 2 negative 0.8s. So that makes that one letter F. And then last but not least, once again, you square root on this side. It could either be positive 7s or negative 7s, making this letter D. Okay? So those are your answers for those there. For number 11, it says indicate whether each real number is rational or irrational. So once again, if you can create a fraction, that makes it rational. So for example, negative 6 is the same thing as negative 6 over 1. That makes this one rational. 3 1/2 is already in a fraction, right? So once again, this one is rational. The square root of 7 ends up being a decimal that goes on forever and ever and ever, that doesn't repeat. So because of that, this one ends up being irrational. And once again, anytime you see that pi, automatically you should know that it is irrational, which makes that one irrational. For number 12, it says name all the sets of numbers to which square root of 50 belongs. So once again, if you are using your calculator, I'm just typing this into my computer as we speak. If I do the square root of 50, I end up getting 7.071067, blah, 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 blah. Goes on forever. It doesn't repeat. So for this one, the only answer it can be is letter E, which makes it irrational. Once it's irrational, it can't be any one of these. So once again, the answer is letter E. For number 13, the side length of a square mirror is the square root of 144 square inches. So here's your mirror, and then we have the square root of 144, right? It says determine whether the side length is rational or irrational. So because the side lengths are 12, remember, if it's square, it means that the side has to be the same all the way around. For area, you do length times width. So when we do 12 times 12, we get 144. Seeing that the answer is 12, and 12 can be converted into a fraction, 12 over 1, we call this one rational. Okay? And then explaining your reasoning, you just simply say the square is rational because the side lengths are whole numbers or integers. Okay? For number 14, we try doing the cube root of 24. So let me grab my computer, or not my computer, my calculator. And so once again, on your calculator, you're just simply doing the cube root of 24. That ends up being 2.884499, blah, 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 blah. So we're going to round this to the nearest 10th place, so we're going to call this 2.9. And then on the other side, we do the square root of 400 divided by 8. First do the square root of 400, which ends up being 20. 20 divided by 8 ends up being 2.5. And when I compare both of those, I ask myself which one's bigger. 2.9 is obviously going to be bigger, so the sign here is the greater than sign. Okay? For number 15, it says, which symbol completes the statement? So once again, we have -2 and 1/5. So for this one, we're just simply going to do 1 divided by 5. We get 0.2. We have a negative in front of it, so we can call this a -2.2. For the other one, we have the negative square root of 7. So first do the square root of 7. Reminder that the negative is on the outside, it's not on the inside. So we just find the square root of 7 first, and then of course attach a negative in front of it. This ends up being a -2.6 roughly. So when we graph this, we go to -2.2, which ends up being over here. This is my -2 and 1/5. And then we go to -2.6, which is over here. And then this ends up being my negative square root of 7. Now here's the biggest issue that a lot of students have. They think that just because it's got a bigger number, -2.6, they think, oh, that one's greater than 2.2. But remember, when you're dealing with negatives, the further it is to the right-hand side of the number line, the bigger it's going to be. So in this case, my sign is going to be a less than sign. Okay, so it eats the larger number, which in this case, my apologies. It eats the larger number, which in this case is the one on the right-hand side. If you notice over here, my apologies, the -2.2 is larger, so my sign is going to go this way. It's going to be the greater than sign. If I go to number 16, there's two parts. Part 1, or Part A, it says order the numbers from least to greatest. Part B, it says to graph and round to the nearest tenth if necessary. So before I do anything, let me take all those numbers and convert them into decimals. It makes my life a lot easier. So once again, on your calculator, you're going to end up doing the square root of 3. So square root of 3 ends up being a 1.7. So over here, I'm going to put 1.7 above the square root of 3. For 7 divided by 10, we get 0.7. For 25 divided by 12, we end up getting about a 2.1. And then this one's the one that a lot of you guys struggle with the most. Convert 4/5 into a decimal. 4/5 is the same thing as 0.8, and remember, because there's the 125 in front of it, this ends up being 125.8%. But remember, we don't want it in percentages. I want the decimal portion. Always divide by 100, because anytime you have percentages, remember that percentages are always out of 100. So when I do 125.8 on the calculator and I divide by 100, always divide by 100 for percentages, I end up getting about a 1.3 roughly. Okay. So now that I have my numbers, I can go ahead and plot all my numbers here. or actually first, I like to do the graphing part first, and then I'll come back to ordering them. So I'm going to graph first. Once again, square root of 3 is about 1.7. So I'm going to go to 1.7. This ends up being the square root of 3. The 7/10 is 0.7, so I'm going to go to 0.7, and I'm going to make a mark here. This is the 7/10. And then I have the 25 over 12, which is the same thing as 2.1. So once again, I am just simply graphing all these numbers on my number line. And then the last one is the 125 and 4/5%, which ends up being about 1.3. That one's about here. So again, this is the 125 and 4/5%. So remember, the nice thing about a number line is the number line automatically puts it in order for you from least to greatest, as long as you're reading it like a book from left to right. So when I order these, the smallest number is going to be that 7/10. Second smallest number, 125 and 4/5%. The third smallest or second largest number is the square root of 3. And then last but not least, my largest number in this set is a 25 over 12. All right. And then for 17, it says the table shows the number of aces per serving attempts for 3 players at a recent volleyball tournament. Order the player from least aces per serving attempt to the greatest aces per serving attempt. So in case you guys aren't aware, an ace is essentially when you are serving the ball and you are able to score a point off of serving that ball. That's what they call an ace in volleyball. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take all these aces and convert them into decimals. It's easier to compare decimals as opposed to the way they have these written out. So the first one we're going to do is 9 divided by 22. So out of 22 serves, 9 of them were aces. So this girl, or this person, I should say, Angela, sorry, this girl, ends up getting about 0.4. And then for the sake of this one, I'm just going to do 0.41. I'm not sure if we're going to need to round to the nearest tenth or hundredth, so I just rounded to the nearest hundredth for this one. For the second one, once again, we have 22 and 2/9. So if you do 2 divided by 9, we end up getting 0.22. So this ends up being 22.2%. But remember, we don't want percentages, we want them in decimals. So then all you need to do is do 22.2 divided by 100, and we end up getting 0.22. For the last one, we get 3 divided by 10, which is 0.3. We can say 0.30. And when I take a look at these, again, I'm ordering them from least aces to most aces, or to the greatest number of aces, I should say. So the person who got the least number of aces is the person who got the smallest amount. If you look at the first number after the decimal, we have a 4, a 2, and a 3. So Jalen got the least. This person got the least number of aces, whereas the person who got the most was this person, which is Angela, and this person got the greatest number of aces. Okay? Which means that Maya ended up getting the not the least, not the most. Okay, so she got right in the middle. For number 18, which decimal is equivalent to -3 and 19/30ths? So again, we know we're going to have a -3 because that's the whole number. And then on the calculator, we simply just use our calculator for the second part. You just simply do 19 divided by 30. And when you do 19 divided by 30, we end up getting 0.63. And the 3 is repeating, so of course we put the repeating bar over just the 3. Okay. Do not make the mistake of putting the repeating bar over the 6 and the 3, because when you type that into your calculator, it's not 0.636363, it's just 0.6 with the repeating 3. So in that case, my answer ends up being letter B. Hopefully this review made a little bit of sense, if not a lot of sense. Remember that for tonight. You guys study not only the front side but the back side. Any of them that you found difficult in class, those are the ones that you're going to want to study the most. So if anything, cover up the answers and see if you can get the answers by being able to replicate what we did in class. Have a great time studying, guys. I will see you all tomorrow. Adios.